So before we begin sculpting our model, it's probably a good idea to go into ZBrush and let's just kind of play around for a few minutes and get familiar with some of the common tools that we're going to use throughout this project. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and open up ZBrush. And again, this is how it opens by default. And again, the first thing we do is come up to Document, New Document, and then we want to get rid of a light box down here. We can either hit the button, or again the hotkey is comma, so I hit comma to get rid of that. And I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to load up our base mesh. We're going to practice playing with that. Alright, so load tool, basemesh.ztl. Remember, we load tool, we load up ZTLs that way. Open that up. And again, to bring it to the stage, we just click and drag, and we go up and hit edit. And the hotkey for edit again is T. Okay. If you hover over a button, you can see what the hotkey is. Q, T. Okay. So we have our base mesh in here, and like I was saying earlier, we'll just go over this. To maneuver around, you just drag. Hold down Alt to move it, and while you're moving it, let go of Alt to zoom in and out. Alright, so you should be getting familiar with that. We can snap our model forward by holding Shift. Okay. A couple of things we can use here over on the right, this Poly F. Alright, we can turn that on, and we can see our polyframe. Alright, it's advised that you do not sculpt with polyframe turned on. It's just a sort of temporary visual guide for us to use now and then. One other thing, over here, your materials. Now, ZBrush comes with all sorts of very cool materials already loaded up. What you see here, this is called the red wax, and that is the default material. It will pretty much always open with this red material here, and in my opinion, this isn't the best material to sculpt with. I prefer using this basic material down here. Okay, and I'll show you why. With these materials, you know, the one thing about sculpting is really how light and shadow play on the surface of our sculpt. All right, so it's important to see how the light is playing on the model. These materials all up here, these madcap materials, they have the light baked into them, so you really can't see the light effect on it, and I'll show you that. If I go back to the red wax and I come up to our light up here, I can move the light around, but you'll notice that it has no effect on the model at all. If I go back to any one of these standard materials down here, alright, these standard materials will show the light effect on it. So if I go back up to light and move that light around, you can see how that affects the model. And this is a very useful tool to use while we're sculpting. Oftentimes just moving the light around will help you see flaws or defects in your model that you might not have seen otherwise. Alright, so something to be aware of. Alright. So like I was saying, I prefer to sculpt in this basic material right here, this basic material 2. Another thing to be aware of up here, these are our brushes. Alright, and ZBrush comes loaded with dozens and dozens of brushes. And all the brushes, for the most part, that we're going to be using are all up here. Alright. The most common brushes that we'll be using are going to be the standard brush, which loads by default. We're going to be using the clay tubes brush. We'll be using the move brush a whole bunch. Okay. We'll also talk about the pinch brush a little bit. Another brush I like to use is the trim dynamic, and I'm going to go over using these as I use them. I'm just showing you the more common brushes. The clay brush is a common brush. What else are we going to use here? Standard. Oh, inflate. We'll be using that from time to time. Okay. I've gone ahead and I can show you, if you want me to show you how to create hotkeys for these brushes. You can see as you look up here, I've got these brushes all mapped to various hotkeys so I can jump between them quickly. If anybody wants to know how to do that, you can email me and we'll go over setting up hotkeys. Alright, so the brushes, those are the brushes, the common brushes that we're going to use. I talked about materials. Standard materials are, especially the basic material, are good materials to sculpt with. A lot of people, though, they like to use either the matte cat gray um, or just the basic material. A lot of people still sculpt in the red wax, and that's fine too. You know, whatever your preference is. But you can always switch over to the basic material if you want to play with the light and see how that's affecting your model. All right, so I would recommend that. Oops. Here we go. Okay. So some of the other things to be concerned about are up across the top here. Of course, we've got draw and edit, all right, which we've already gone over. Z add and Z sub. Now, Z add is pretty much what we're going to be using all the time. That will build up our form for us. And again, I'm going to go. You'll see me demo that in a minute. The mRGB and RGB are only when we're dealing with color information. Okay. The draw size is, of course, our brush size. And our Z intensity is how strong our brush affects our model. All right. So we're constantly adjusting our Z intensity and our brush size. The focal shift you should never have to touch. All right. That changes based on what brush you happen to use. Okay. So you shouldn't ever have to touch that at all, the focal shift. Let me show you the shortcut for getting to these tools. If I hold down my space bar, okay, it almost always comes up right where the draw size slider is, right on my cursor there. So I can, on the fly, really quickly, as I'm working, I can hit the space bar, adjust my draw size, hit the space bar, adjust my draw size, and from this one space bar palette, I have access pretty much to everything I need. All right, my brushes, my materials, Z add, Z sub, intensity, just everything I need from that one palette. All right, so the spacebar becomes a very important tool to use for just quickly accessing. I use it almost entirely for draw size on the fly. As I'm moving, as I'm working around here, I want to adjust my draw size, and that's how I do it, instead of going up to the top right there. Okay. So that's important. Okay, we've covered materials, brushes, Z intensity, draw size. A very cool feature of ZBrush is if I hold down Control and while I hover over any button, it gives me a help document. All right, and that'll tell me exactly what that brush does or what that button does. Okay, and that works for pretty much any button inside of ZBrush. Okay, if I just hold down Control while I hover over something, it will tell me what that is. All right, so that's very useful for for beginners to ZBrush. So take advantage of that. All right. Now, ZBrush loads up by default with the tool palette already open over here. Now, we're not going to be using every menu in here, but the ones that are important are Subtool and Geometry. All right, those are going to be the ones that we use most frequently. All right. So for dividing geometry, right here you can see if I turn on my, let's see if I just turn this around here. We divide geometry right here by hitting the divide button. Okay, and you can see how that smooths out. And it gives us a slider that we can go back and forth and adjust our subdivision levels. You'll notice up here active points. That tells us how many polygons that are currently active. If I slide this up to 2 now, you'll see we have 1500. So every time, there we go, 378, and then goes up to 1500. So every time we divide, it quadruples the number of points that we have, the number of polygons, all right? So keep that in mind. ZBrush is very cool. We can go up to several million polygons, depending on how much memory your computer has. But for our purposes, we'll probably only go up to about 1.5 million to 2 million polygons for our final sculpt. Okay. So I'm just going to tell you about the hotkeys for divide right here. So let me go back and just delete that higher one I just created. All right, I have one subdivision level here. If I hit Control D will add another subdivision level, and I can hit Control D again and hit Control D again, and you see each time I hit it, it adds another level and it quadruples it each time. Okay, so Control D again will go up. If I hit Shift D, I can go down in my subdivision levels. All right, so Control D will add another level, Shift D will come down in levels, and once I've got some levels here established, I've got 5 levels established. If I just want to go up, I hit D. D will bring me up until I can't go up anymore. So I'm hitting D, and that's as high as I go. If I want to add another one, I hit Control D, and that will add another one. All right. So with 6 levels of subdivisions, I've got 385,000 polygons. If I hit that one more time, I'm going to be well over 1 million. All right, somewhere probably about 1.5. So Control D, hit that, and there we go. 1.5 million polygons. That's at 7 levels, and that's ultimately where you'll probably be for your final sculpt. All right, but for us starting out, and I'm just going to go Shift D to bring us down. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and delete these higher ones because I don't need them right now. The smart way to work, the best way to work, is to only divide as you need them. All right, so at this level, 378, I'm mostly going to be using my move brush. I'm going to make my bust a little smaller, my draw size kind of big. All right. One important thing I should mention before I forget is that we always work with symmetry turned on. Okay. Now you can tell if symmetry is turned on by that. You can see that little red dot. If I hit X on my keyboard, okay, now I have 2, and you can see how that splits right across the center. All right, and that is my symmetry button right there. So X is symmetry. You should always work with your symmetry on. Okay, and if I move my bust back a little bit with my symmetry turned on and I'm using my move brush, now I can start to affect this model. Okay, so we want to work with the lower subdivision levels to block out the basic shape of our bust. Okay, and I'm going to talk more about blocking out the shape and playing with the tools here before we start really sculpting our bust in the next video.